Kyle. Amazing. So good.
I
I
had
know we're a little over time, and I want to be really mindful of your time. So if you need to go, we can do wrap up here. But
I thought we went till 8:30. I thought actually. So.
Oh well, never mind then. We are
Okay.
right on track.
Uh-huh.
I thought we had 8, but forget that. Let's ask some more questions.
Yeah, yeah, so I'm interested to know too, like if there's stuff that was surprising to you guys or just wasn't clear.
One thing that I was thinking of with doing the local, basically as streetcars, or like where streetcars were at surface for local. I think about now where all of our avenues are car choked with congestion now, and if they had done that, whether that ultimately would have been better for our streetscapes if we had dedicated streetcars or rail, surface level rail, where we have underground local, and like, yes, the subway has, I know you were saying that they envisioned it as a 6-track system, which sort of makes that a moot point. But maybe if they had just done 4 rails but had put the 2 locals above ground, that would have sort of blocked off that surface level street space for rail.
Right, and maybe they could have added 2 more tracks later if they needed it, and maybe could have gotten something started sooner than they did. But your point is kind of just that the surface, like they wouldn't have been able to get rid of the streetcars basically so easily.
Yeah.
And we might still have them. I don't know much about that. What the attitudes were like in terms of getting. I wonder what the public thought about that. How okay they were with losing the streetcars? And I'm from Wisconsin, and I know I'm kind of interested in like the history of that in Milwaukee with the streetcars, and they didn't like the street because the buses were smaller, so like they got these special buses that were extra wide but people then they were okay with it. But I wonder how could we have saved the streetcars if they were integrated with the subway. And there was a thing. So one of the things too that kind of saved them, the city, sort of bought them more time, was in the late 1890s they electrified the streetcars, and that actually made them much faster, and for a while. And there was actually, so kind of the growth in ridership on the elevator really kind of stopped, and even like went down a little bit in the late 1890s. People switched because now they didn't have to go up and down all these stairs to get to the elevated train. It wasn't cheaper. I mean, I think it's actually not a penny more, but it was a lot easier, and it was just much faster. So you had a big kind of big growth in ridership on the streetcars when they electrified. And that kind of helped the city make it through the rest of the 1890s before you had any subways, because nothing, the first subway opened in 1904.
So just for those that don't know, why were what is the reasoning behind why the streetcars were removed? Was it because they were just having a hard time competing with the subway at some point, or do you know the history behind that?
I don't know here. I know like in Milwaukee, I think they just thought it would be cheaper to maintain. I think because they were responsible for taking care of that part of the street too, where the tracks ran, so they just had rubber tired buses. It was less expensive, I guess. They didn't like the noise of the streetcars. The rubber tired buses were quieter, so there were certain community reasons. I don't know. I've heard something to do with someone else. I'm sure someone here knows why. Something to do, I thought, with like the Guardia, the city, wanted to get rid of them.
Yeah, or I'm wondering if they just thought that, like, given the fast growth of the city, that it would be better to invest in a subway. I'm curious. If anyone knows, they should speak up.
It seems like there was some kind of idea that buses seemed more futuristic and nicer. Like you had the Fifth Avenue Coach Company, which that was expensive, and they were buses, but like in my mind, the streetcar is nicer than a bus. But back then, it kind of seemed like it was the other way around. That a bus is more.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. It's like with Kyle's research, you can spend decades and still not know all the answers because there's different conspiracies for it and theories. But I think the main reason competition with the subway was more with competition with automobile era, I mean, buses were better than streetcars in that they could get out of the center of the road and pick people up on the curb. And theoretically, they were more flexible with the routing, although we can see how that's not really the case because our bus routes today are often the same as they were decades ago. But technically, they're easier to change. And then there was just a lot of concerns with street maintenance and having the streetcar companies pay for roadway maintenance, getting in the way of traffic and things like that. I see Sydney posted, the General Motors. There's a lot of different reasons, and I think there were a few more questions, Kyle, from Daniel. The first one was, when the engineers envisioned a lot of branches that didn't happen, were these branches similar to the ones that exist in the subway today, or were they envisioned to be shorter ones? And also, did they envision branches that were flat or more flyover junctions? So, for instance, like
I think they, so I think that it's kind of both. So that the part of the reason I think we do have kind of a lot of branches. The way it is already, it's very branchy. It's very interconnected. I think that's definitely part of because they really wanted to be as interconnected and have as much redundancy and flexibility as possible. And I think they thought too, probably with the 4-track mainline, you can have a bunch of branches. So we do have some branches, more than I think other systems probably. But I think they imagine even more, where you have that you could have a bunch of branches. I don't know how many. I haven't seen any maps, but they talked about it, or like connecting to ferry terminals, or kind of as the city grew, you could add a branch here, branch there. I mean, you'd have more trunk lines too, but and then in terms of the junctions, it seemed like they were planning for flyovers, because they originally the first route there was going to be a big one at Union Square, and they were that had flyovers. So I think that because they wouldn't want to slow down the express trains either, so I assumed that they would somehow incorporate. It wouldn't have been a grade crossing. So I think, because I assume you're acting to the point that I made, that they wanted them all tracks on one level in order to make junctions easier. But I don't think it was because it was going to be an at-grade junction. I just think that there would have been flyovers, but I think making that kind of flyover would have been even more complicated with the double-deck system to kind of connect into it, and it would have interrupted the way it even functioned, with the pipe galleries and stuff in there. So I think that's what it was. There were a couple places, like we have Nostrand Junction things, which is flat there, but they actually do mention that later on. There's kind of a throwaway line. They basically say, well, there we didn't put in flyovers, but that's just because there's no traffic there. So I think to them, though, they would be shocked that we haven't done that yet. I think they was what is wrong with you people, like, that you haven't fixed that yet, because it was, I think they would have, they imagine that's, once you get to some more traffic, of course you would do that.
Rain's trying to get some clarification on another question, but I'm going to go ahead and show my ignorance here. And can you explain what you mean by like flyovers with the branch junctions? I'm having trouble envisioning like what that connection even looks like, and you were saying like they would be shocked that we haven't done that yet, but I can't picture what that is.
Yeah, so I guess having, I mean, someone else could probably explain this better than me, but having, if you have trains crossing, in front of one another, or I guess it would be, I mean, if trains are merging or diverging, that's fine because they're both trying to get on or off the same track, so they need to be at the same level. But if you have a situation where trains are merely crossing over one another on the same grade, you're going to have delays that serve no purpose. Because one train stops for another train just to cross. It's not because they're trying to necessarily get to the same track, and therefore they would have to wait. It's just because one is blocking the other. Just like having a grade crossing with vehicles and trains. So I think they would have, and that's what we have at Nostrand Junction, where there are delays that could be fixed by having a so-called flyover where a track just goes over the other track instead of crossing it at grade. Obviously, that's more expensive, but I think I don't know how exactly they would have connected the branch lines, but I think you can look at the ones that they had drawn up plans for, or even something like 96th Street, where they, those where the express tracks go down under and they turn. Now they had to make a bunch of changes there, so I think it was they were still trying to figure out how to design that properly, but I think they wanted it to, in order to be as fast as possible, if you're gonna spend all this money on this huge system and with 4 tracks and everything, I think it's pretty clear they would not want to let something like a grade crossing slow it all down. Otherwise, you're going through so much trouble to make it fast. Is that at all helpful?
Yeah, definitely.
Because I don't know what I wonder. I'm not totally clear on exactly how they would have how many branch lines they imagined, and what it would have looked like with a double deck system, how they would have tried to connect it in. They were really in uncharted territory though too, so I think that's why a lot of it, like with the first, there was a lot of refinement after the first subway opened, improvements that were made for the future subway lines. I mean, the IND in some ways is kind of like ultimate, and from an engineering point of view. So there's a question about the going from a steam to electricity. Let's see, the evolution of the. Let's see, the arrangement of the underground space has been narrowed by electrification. I guess that's true. I suppose it takes less space. Come here. Would you mind just talking? It would be easier to just chat if you wouldn't mind just unmuting and telling us. I'm curious to understand what your question is. It sounds interesting, but I don't know what it is exactly. If you're trying to speak, you are muted because I don't hear you. But I could just mention one thing is they didn't have. So I'm not sure when electric multiple unit technology came, but it was a few years. It was after 1891. They didn't have it. So to achieve like these, especially to achieve this 40 miles an hour, would have been really quite a feat. Because it would have been electric locomotives, and with the thing with a locomotive is you have just one car where all the power is coming from. So you're limited to the traction that one car gets, the locomotive. Whereas today on the subway, almost every wheel of the whole train is powered, so you can climb much steeper grades and things. And when you have just one locomotive pulling a bunch of cars, you're very limited in terms of your traction. And to have bigger trains and to get higher speed, you need it to be heavier. You need heavier locomotives, which is one of the limiting factors in the elevated. So it was very ambitious to get that, to expect to get 40 miles an hour on something that's going to be starting and stopping relatively frequently. And then from steam to electric power, I mean, again, I can say that it was designed to be electric from the beginning, so that's certainly an advantage. It wasn't retrofitted. I never thought about the space. I guess, yeah, with the electric, I mean, and that's with like the first tube lines, the ones in London that were first, considered a tube, they were electric. You couldn't, I don't think that's, I think so. You're right, in the sense that electricity made it possible to have much smaller, much narrower tunnels than they could have otherwise. And that was part of too why they didn't like that line, though, because they were these really narrow tunnels, which I guess made it loud. And for whatever reason, the ventilation was not great. Let's see. Oh, no, Mike. Okay. Well, is that helpful? Anything that I said? Okay, thanks. I did not get the fact that it was. Oh, okay, yeah, right. It was designed to be electric from the beginning. In New York. Mm-hmm. The subway. The
Kyle,
elevator. Go ahead.
I have a quick question. I know I've already asked a lot, but I don't see any more in the chat yet. You mentioned in your writing about the platforms being at sort of an apex for taking advantage of the acceleration, then leaving the platform and you're already braking, coming up. But that at the elevated stations, they also did that to some extent, but then there was more stairs. And you said there was some sort of trade-off, and my notes were not super clear on like what the trade-off was, but something about the apices being for the elevated ones still having those apices.
Right, that's good. Yeah, so I learned that the plural of apex is apice.
Yeah, I saw that in the article.
But they can. I guess you can also. I tried to change it to apexes because I think as it was apexes, you can also use that. But so the stations were at apices, apexes. So it was like at the each where they could fit. Where they could do it. It was at the top of a hill, basically, at the top of a little hill. So that way, when the train is stopping, it's kind of going uphill, and then when it's accelerating out of the station, it's going downhill. They're pretty slight. It's just a few feet. But and I don't know how much difference has been in practice, but they thought it would make a significant difference, especially for the local trains to be faster and use a little bit less energy to get a little bit faster, stop a little bit quicker, and accelerate a little bit faster out of the station. Now, I think what you're asking is then, well, what about at an elevated station? So that worked perfectly with making the platforms close to the street surface underground, because you come up a little bit at the station and then you go down a little bit. With the elevateds, you have the opposite. To have the apex, it's going to be a little bit further from the street. And I think they decided that that was worth it because yes, it'd be a few more steps, but the trains will be faster. So overall, people get where they're going faster, if it'll be a little bit less convenient. I think that was a decision they made. It doesn't, right, but it works perfectly at underground, right? You know, you come up to the surface, but
yeah, I think I was wondering, was the time difference of the train speeds so much more improved than the extra time it takes for the extra steps?
And I wonder, you know, too, because when people talk about travel time and wait time, and you know, there's this idea that the time waiting on a platform is worse or perceived as being taking longer than the time on a train. And I don't know if that's true in rush hour when trains are crowded and you just want to get there fast. But I could imagine being true. But I wonder, like, station. I think steps would have a bigger penalty still. Like walking through a station on them. But if you have to go, it's like triple. Like if you had your whole commute, you know, was going up steps, you know. So I don't know. But there's probably some way to look at that. You know, what's interesting is they did on the 2nd Avenue subway. They, in their environmental impact statement, they had this footnote about these ridership projections, and they extended that, well, the ridership projections in the final are lower than in the original, and they say that the reason that they're lower is because we revised the engineering, and some of the stations had to be deeper than we originally planned, and for that reason, they're not as attractive to some riders, and so there's going to be less ridership because we had to make the tunnels deeper, you know, and that's with escalators, but they actually were able to quantify that effect. And that was because they made it deeper in order to reduce the construction impact. So this is kind of some of the same trade-offs, you know, that they are facing.
When I was on a tour of the 2nd Avenue subway when it was under construction, I thought it would be interesting to ask them why they weren't building a 4-track line, and they told me that 2nd Avenue is too narrow.
It's too narrow. Because of
the
the blizzard, I don't know, right? We can't fit the sphere.
even narrower.
But that's because 2nd Avenue is too narrow. Yeah, you know, I don't know. I wonder if.
And they're so far deep underground, they don't even need to underpin anything if they're. So I wonder what excuse. that.
And you know, it's kind of, I mean, one of my professors at Columbia is the transportation engineering professor, said that he really thinks that you should have just built it close to the surface, cut and cover, and it would have been a lot faster to build. And he also points out that people get mad anyway about the noise and the construction impact, so they're still, you know, like, not happy with it. So why not just do it faster and end up with the better system? Now I'm sure it was so the first subway was, so we talk about cut and cover. Really, the first subway was open cut. So cut and cover was actually, like, it was an improvement. So cut and cover meant you open it up the street, but then you immediately build a timber street, you know, with heavy timbers. You cover it over, and then you do all your work underneath this timber street. So you build like timber pilings that go way down, but you just dig holes for these big pieces of timber, and then you cover it with wood, and then you go underground and then do all your work, the rest of the excavation. So that's actually what they meant by cut and cover, as opposed to open cut, where you just rip open the street and you do all the work till everything's done, and then you build a new street on top of it, which was how they did it. So cut and cover really is an advance over open cut type of construction, which the first time it was pretty much open cut. They just left it open until they finished, and it would have been very, it's hard to, I mean, you can't walk across the street for like 3 years. I mean, I'm sure they had bridges and things that they put up, but But yeah, so originally, like cut and cover was a good thing, like as a much better way to build.
Did the city compensate the streetcar owners for the time that they weren't able to operate on the street?
No, I think they kept it going. I think they would move the tracks and things to because yeah, I think they had to keep it going essentially. I'm sure that they moved them to the side or something, or I don't think they would literally open the whole street. I think they'd do like half of the street at one time, and then the other half at a different time. And I'm not sure on that. I mean, I know but I believe they had to, as much as possible, keep the streetcars going, and I believe they did. I mean, even when it's kind of amazing when they electrified the streetcars, they figured out how to do it really fast in like a few days or maybe a week or something. Because if you shut down your whole line and you lose all your business, it takes longer to build it back up. But they figured out how to do that very quickly. It was kind of amazing. But I'm not sure on the details, but I believe that they moved the tracks to the side or whatever. They allowed the streetcars to.
And when they electrified, did they remove the yokes from under the street? Which, if so, would that have allowed them to revise the design or no?
No, they used the yokes because the city wouldn't let them have overhead electric wires. So otherwise, though, yes, they probably could have gotten even a little bit closer, but they used that space to put the conduits when they electrified.
Oh, okay. So unlike Brooklyn, or most of Brooklyn.
What's that about Brooklyn?
Like most of the Brooklyn or Brooklyn streetcar network, which seemed to have overhead, but I didn't know that.
Yeah, I don't really quite understand how that works, like with water and stuff getting in there. How they had like this third rail under there. I don't really. How would you maintain it?
Okay, well, I see it's after 8:30. I don't see other questions. I mean, I'm happy to stay on here.
We're down to the hardcore group. So thank you, everyone. You can feel free to email me if you have more questions. So this was really fun to do this. So,
thank you, Kyle. And we never really introduced you at the beginning. But this is Kyle, and Kyle is a performance analyst at the MTA. Now he's an infrastructure working on maintaining infrastructure. But yeah, he's very interested in the subway, and he's doing a lot of work also, not for the MTA, but thinking about how to improve the subway now. This was focused on the past, but he has a lot of ideas on how to reform the MTA now, which is a whole other interesting conversation.
Yeah, thank you for mentioning that. Yeah, that's very true.
And not just the past and the future, but the present. Doing a lot of work reducing delays, and so this was focused on the past, but there's a lot of present and future to invite Kyle back for next time.
I do find it really inspiring too, because I mean they had real political problems back then too, and yeah. So, but it's I do find it inspiring to some of their ambition and that they actually were able to pull it off. So, yeah, because I would like to see bigger, better things in the future here. So we could do it.
Rain, thank you for introducing Kyle. Kyle, I'm very sorry I did not lead with that as folks are typically expecting. But yeah, thank you so much for joining us. We'd definitely love to have you back. And for those that are still here on the call or are seeing this recording, Kyle is our member of the month spotlight. So you can find that on our website, yptnyc.org if you want to learn more about Kyle and see a link to his piece. So thank you.
Thanks, guys. This was really fun.